This video is about German wars that marked the end of an era. Subscribe for more. In the winter of 1944, the chill of the German countryside cut through the air as the remnants of the once mighty Wehrmacht regrouped for a final stand. The echoes of conflict reverberated across Europe, where blood-soaked fields had become the stage for the titanic struggles between ideologies and nations. The Allies, led by the United States, had pushed deep into the heart of Nazi territory, their sights set on Berlin. Among them was Captain James "Jimmy" Ellis, a seasoned officer whose steely resolve had seen him through the turmoil of multiple campaigns. Ellis stood atop a ridge overlooking the town of St. Vith, Belgium, now a strategic linchpin as the Germans prepared to mount a significant counteroffensive. He adjusted his parka, a crackling radio at his side buzzing with the urgency of orders and intel. Beside him was Lieutenant Maria Schrader, a fierce and resourceful German-American who had enlisted to fight against the tyranny she had seen consume her family's homeland. Together, they were a powerful team caught in the middle of a conflict that pulled at the very fabric of their identities. "Another push is coming, Jimmy," Maria said, her breath clouding in the frigid air as she scanned the horizon. "We can hold this line if they hit us at dawn." Ellis nodded, his eyes narrowing as he took in the distant shapes of German tanks shrouded in mist. In the back of his mind, however, he felt the weight of a different kind of war, a war that transcended the battlefield. It was the conflict of ideologies that had ignited a firestorm across Europe, leading to devastating consequences. As he wrestled with the enormity of the situation, an eerie stillness fell over the landscape, broken only by the distant rumble of engines. Meanwhile, in Berlin, the haunting corridors of the Reich Chancellery hosted a different kind of tension. Adolf Hitler, a man once buoyed by the fervor of his initial campaigns, now sat in a darkened room, surrounded by his most trusted aides. The walls, adorned with banners and maps, were a stark reminder of the empire he had sought to build. But as military reports poured in, the grim realization that Berlin was under siege loomed large. "If Hitler, we must engage in a full retreat," one officer urged, his voice trembling with the weight of his words. "The Allies are closing in, and our supplies are dwindling. You speak of retreat as if it were an option," Hitler snapped, his eyes blazing with defiance. "We shall not yield. We will unleash Operation Wat am Rhein. The Americans will never see it coming, and we will shatter their resolve." The room fell silent, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on the faces of men who were all too aware that they were not just fighting for Germany, but for their lives. Among them was Colonel Klaus von Stein, a war-weary officer who had witnessed the horrors of the Eastern Front. He felt the burden of history upon him, a weight that pressed down harder with each passing day. As plans for the surprise attack unfolded, somewhere in the West, a different battle brewed, a battle of survival and resistance. In the heart of occupied France, a young Jewish man named David Cohen fought against the tide of despair. He had seen his family torn apart by the ravages of war and the brutal grip of the Nazis. Now, he was part of the underground movement, risking his life to sabotage German supply lines. David crouched in the shadows, his heart pounding as he prepared to execute a daring plan. His eyes flicked to the assembled group of rebels, men and women from all walks of life, united by a singular purpose. Amidst them stood Esther, a fierce woman with a fire in her eyes and steel in her voice. Together, they shared stolen moments of laughter amidst the darkness, each one a precious reminder of life before the war. "Tonight, we hit the railway yards," Esther declared, determination etched on her face. "If we can disrupt their supply routes, we can save lives. We can show them that they will not win." As they moved through the cobblestone streets, David's mind wandered to the broader war that raged on. He knew that while the Allies sought to liberate Europe, they were also battling a rising tide of anti-Semitism and hatred that could not be vanquished by guns alone. It was a conflict that would shape the very landscape of post-war Europe and Israel itself. Back on the front lines, the dawn broke with a hesitant light, illuminating the battlefield where Ellis and Maria stood ready. Tension was palpable, the air thick with the scent of gunpowder and the promise of violence. They watched as the German tanks rolled forth, their silhouettes stuck against the rising sun. "Remember the plan," Ellis said, his voice steady. Maria nodded, gripping her rifle tightly as they prepared to engage in a fight that would determine the fate of nations. First shots rang out, echoing through the valley, and they sprang into action, hearts racing with the fury of battle. Just as they engaged the enemy, another message crackled through the radio, an urgent plea from high command. "Captain Ellis, we have intel about a key German figure on the move. If you intercept him, it could turn the tide of this war." Ellis' heart raced. The capture of a high-ranking German officer could provide valuable intelligence and possibly lead to a crumbling of the Nazi command structure. "Maria, we have to split our forces," he said, urgency threading his voice. She met his gaze, the gravity of their decision hanging heavily in the air. "You know this could be a trap, Jimmy. We must be careful." But the urgency of the moment pulled at him. If they hesitated, the chance might slip away. "We'll use the element of surprise." As they launched into their plan, the battle raged on around them, the clash of steel, then the cries of soldiers merging into a cacophony of chaos. It was a defining moment, one that would alter the course of the war and the lives of everyone involved. In the shadows of the past, the spectre of a renewed conflict loomed large. The faces of those who had fought and fallen echoed in David's thoughts as he navigated the dark alleys, preparing for his own pivotal moment. He knew that this war was not merely about territory, but also about legacy, hope, and the future of humanity itself. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the battlefield in shades of crimson, the stakes had never been higher. Decisions made here would echo through history, and intertwining of destinies, where the protagonists from different fronts would soon find their paths converging in ways they could not yet foresee. With the dawn of a new battle on the horizon, the question lingered: would they emerge from the shadows of war, or would the ghosts of the past redefine their futures? The conflict that had shaped nations and identities was far from over, and with it came the promise of revelations yet to unfold. Part 2 awaited, where the lines between friend and foe would blur, unveiling secrets that could change everything. The sun cast elongated shadows as the air thickened with smoke and gunfire. Captain James Jimmy Ellis and Lieutenant Maria Schneider moved swiftly through the chaos of the St. Vith battlefield, the sounds of war enveloping them in a harrowing embrace. The urgency of their mission to intercept a high-ranking German officer weighed heavily on their hearts, even as the fight for their lives raged on around them. "Stay close," Ellis ordered as they ducked behind a battered tank, the remnants of the previous day's fighting littering the terrain. The echoes of artillery and the crackle of machine guns created a dissonance that was both familiar and terrifying. "We need to find out where they were holding him." Maria nodded, her German-American heritage fueling her resolve. She had long since abandoned her fear, replaced instead with a fierce determination to see an end to the brutality that had taken so much from her family. "The intel suggested he would be in a convoy moving through the main road," she replied, her eyes scanning the surrounding chaos for any sign of movement. Just then, a sudden explosion rocked the area, sending debris flying. Maria instinctively pulled Ellis down as the world around them erupted into flames. "We need to move," she shouted, adrenaline coursing through her veins. They dashed toward the tree line, where they hoped to find cover and a clear path to their target. Simultaneously, in the heart of Berlin, Colonel Klaus von Stein sat in a dimly lit war room, the weight of decisions pressing on him like a vice. The tension in the air was palpable as the officers around him debated the necessity of the planned counteroffensive, Operation Bad am Rhein. "Colonel, this plan is reckless," the one officer exclaimed. "Our resources are depleted, and the Allies are gaining ground every minute. We cannot afford to lose more men." The von Stein's tired eyes flicked from one officer to another, weighing their concerns against the FHR's stubborn resolve. "We must strike back. If we can catch them off guard, we might just buy ourselves enough time to fortify Berlin." His voice was steady, but inside, he wrestled with the futility of their situation. Meanwhile, David Cohen and the underground resistance fighters crept through the dimly lit streets of occupied France. Their mission was perilous, but the stakes were high. Disrupting German supply lines could mean the difference between life and death for countless civilians. As they approached the railway yard, David's heart raced. The shadows of war loomed large, but the thought of liberating his people fueled his resolve. "Esther, take point." "We'll follow your lead," he whispered, focusing on the task ahead. Esther nodded, her expression fierce as she led them closer to the tracks. The sound of clanking machinery and distant voices filled the air. "We can alert the guards," she instructed, her instincts sharp and aware. As they crept closer, David caught sight of the German soldiers milling about, unaware of the imminent threat. The adrenaline surged through him as he remembered the faces of his family, the ones lost to the atrocities of the regime. This was not just an act of sabotage, it was a fight for those who could no longer fight for themselves. The railway yard was a chaotic tableau of crates and carts, but their eyes were set on a specific target, a convoy of supplies heading to the front lines. "On my mark," Esther whispered, her voice barely audible over the din of the yard. In the darkness, time seemed to slow as David's mind raced with thoughts of their mission. He had never wanted to be a soldier, but the war had left him no choice. He thought of Jimmy and Maria risking their lives on the battlefields of the East. They were all fighting the same fight in different ways, bound together by fate's unyielding hand. Back on the front lines, Ellis and Maria navigated through the dense cover of trees, the breaths synchronized with the staccato of gunfire in the distance. They approached a clearing, where the rumble of engines indicated the movement of the German convoy. "There, that's our target." Ellis pointed, his eyes locking onto a group of vehicles crawling along the narrow road. Maria nodded, her heart pounding as they positioned themselves behind a fallen log. The tension was palpable. They could see the outlines of German officers in the lead vehicle. Their objective was in sight, but it was heavily guarded. "On my count," Ellis murmured, raising his rifle. 3, 2, 1. As they opened fire, the night erupted into chaos. The surprise attack took the Germans off guard, and chaos ensued as soldiers scrambled for cover. Bullets whizzed past, and shouts echoed through the air. "Cover me," Maria shouted, darting from her position toward the convoy. She took aim, her training kicking in as she targeted the driver of the lead vehicle. The man crumpled to the ground, and she felt a surge of satisfaction. Ellis moved alongside her, his heart racing as they fought through the fray. "We need to get to that car," he shouted above the cacophony. The vehicles were their only chance to reach the officer inside and extract valuable information. Esther and her team had also sprung into action, the sound of explosions resonating in the distance as they set fire to the railway tracks. She yelled, urging her comrades forward. David rushed alongside her, the heat of the flames illuminating their path. They could see the supplies being loaded onto trucks, chaos erupting as the gods finally realized they were under attack. But they pressed on, each step forward fueled by the hope of liberation. As David reached the center of the yard, he spotted a group of German soldiers attempting to regroup. Without hesitation, he held a Molotov cocktail, the glass shattering and igniting a blaze that sent shockwaves through the enemy ranks. Back in Belgium, Maria exchanged fire with a German soldier, the sounds of combat engulfing them as they edged closer to their prize. "Jimmy," she shouted, spotting movement in the lead vehicle. Ellis peered through the smoke, determination etched on his face. "We have to get in there now." With a final push, they barreled toward the car, only to find themselves facing a barrage of enemy fire. The urgency of the moment hung heavily in the air, the stakes escalating as they navigated the trap they had set for themselves. "Move, move, move," Ellis urged, adrenaline coursing through him as he fought to keep them both alive. But the battle was far from over. As their bullets flew and the clash of wills intensified, the true nature of the war began to emerge, the relentless struggle for identity, freedom, and the future of a shattered Europe. As the dust settled from a firefight and the flames from the sabotage melded with the smoke of battle, the convergence of these lives on this fateful day set the stage for revelations that would ripple through history. Each character, driven by their own motivations, now found themselves at crossroads, where the choices made would echo far beyond the battlefield. With the enemy closing in and the stakes reaching their fever pitch, both sides braced for the next clash, a confrontation that would reveal the true cost of war and the lengths to which one must go for freedom. The final act of this chapter loomed large, the threads that bound their destinies woven tighter with each passing moment. And as the sun dipped low, illuminating the horizon, the question arose, would they emerge victorious, or would the shadows of war consume them all? Part 3 awaited, where the battle for survival would intertwine with the fight for justice, and the true meaning of sacrifice would be laid bare. Amidst the chaos of battle, Captain James "Jimmy" Ellis and Lieutenant Marie Schneider pressed forward, hearts racing as they fought through the enemy lines. The air was thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and smoke, each breath a reminder of the stakes. They had come too far to turn back now. Capturing that high-ranking German officer could be the turning point in the Allies' struggle against the Third Reich. "Cover me," Maria shouted, sprinting towards the lead vehicle, where the officer was likely hiding. Bullets whizzed past her, ricocheting off the armored car's surface as she crouched low, her eyes narrowed with focus. Jimmy followed closely, his rifle raised, scanning for any sign of the enemy. For them, this was more than just a military operation, it was personal. As they reached the vehicle, Marie spotted the officer trying to escape through the back door. "There," she yelled, adrenaline surging through her veins. She aimed, pulling the trigger just as he ducked inside. A shot rang out, and the officer stumbled, falling beside the vehicle. Jimmy leaped forward, but in that moment a deafening explosion erupted nearby, sending debris flying. The ground shook violently, and Maria was knocked off her feet. Dazed but resolute, she pushed herself up, scanning the area for Jimmy. Smoke billowed, obscuring her vision, and the sounds of the battlefield faded into a chaotic blur. "Jimmy," she called out, fear creeping into her heart as she searched for him among the wreckage. Just then, she spotted a figure emerging from the smoke. It was Jimmy, his face grimy but determined. He had reached the officer, who lay groaning on the ground. "Get him, Maria," Jimmy shouted, urgency lacing his voice. Maria rushed toward them, her senses heightened. She knelt beside the officer, her rifle trained on him. "You coming with us," she ordered, her tone leaving no room for argument. The officer, bloodied and terrified, raised his hands. "I have information that can help you." Maria hesitated, her heart thundering in her chest. She had heard tales of German officers trying to manipulate their captives with false promises. But this was a chance, perhaps their only chance, to gather essential intel that could shift the war's tide. "What do you know?" she demanded. "We're preparing to launch an operation to retake the territory you've gained. If you let me go, I can provide you with crucial information about our positions and plans," he offered, his voice a mix of desperation and calculation. Jimmy interjected, still wary of the officer's intentions. "We can risk it." But Maria, her instincts igniting, felt the weight of the decision crushing her. "No, we need to know what the Germans are planning. It could save lives." As they argued, David Cohen and the resistance fighters pushed deeper into the railway yard, the flames from their sabotage licking at the night sky. The sounds of panic amongst the German guards echoed around him. Each step forward reminded David of his purpose, the faces of his family urging him on. "David, we need to move," Esther shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. They were regrouping. David turned to see the chaos unfolding around them. The German soldiers were scrambling, disorganization overtaking their ranks as explosions rocked the yard. With a fierce resolve, he nodded to Esther and the others, rallying the group for one final push. "Let us disrupt their operations for good," he rallied. As they charged forward, David threw another improvised explosive device towards a cluster of crates filled with munitions. It detonated, sending soldiers scurrying for cover. Amidst the turmoil, David caught sight of a group of women and children who had been hiding nearby, their faces pale with fear. His heart raced. "Get them to safety," he shouted to his comrades, pointing towards a building at the far end of the yard. Esther nodded, her focus unwavering. "I'll lead them. You take care of the supplies." With a fierce determination, David pressed onward, knowing that every moment counted. He could feel the momentum building in their favor, but he couldn't shake the haunting realization of what it would mean if they failed. Meanwhile, back in St. Vith, Maria and Jimmy stood at a critical crossroads. The German officer lay between them, eyes darting between the two Americans. "You can trust her," he urged, his voice desperate. "This is a war. You'll betray your country for a lie." "Just shut up," Maria snapped, feeling anger and resolve intertwined. "You're the one who has brought this war upon millions. Why should I believe anything that comes from you?" Jimmy watched the exchange, recognizing the turmoil within Maria. He stepped closer to her. "We can let him play us against each other. We have to decide quickly." The officer seized the moment. "Listen to him. I can give you information that will save countless American lives. You must trust me." In that moment, Maria felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. The officer's words echoed with the harsh reality of their fight. Was it worth the risk? She turned to Jimmy, searching for answers in his eyes. "We have to take him prisoner," Jimmy declared. "But we need to move now." Maria nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. "But we on high alert. If he tries anything, he won't. We'll keep him under guard until we reach safety," Jimmy assured her, his voice steady. As they bound the German officer's hands, a renewed sense of urgency swept over them. Just as they turned to navigate through the chaos, another explosion rocked the ground, sending a shockwave of debris flying in their direction. Maria shouted, pulling the officer to safety as they dove behind the wreckage. The sound of chaos enveloped them, and they braced for the ensuing battle. In a railway yard, David's group huddled together, their hearts pounding from the adrenaline and fear. He could see the Germans regrouping, preparing their defenses, and knew that their window of opportunity was closing fast. "David," yelled, his voice cutting through the din. They surged forward, pushing against the tide of chaos. With every step, he felt their shared resolve, the bonds forged in the fires of war strengthening their spirits. As David knew the supply trucks, he could hear the shouts of German soldiers rallying to protect their assets. He ducked low, weaving through the shadows, until he spotted a large crate marked ammunition. "This is it," he shouted to Esther, who was rallying the other fighters to protect the civilians. "If we blow this up, it'll create chaos and buy us time." Esther nodded, a fierce look in her eyes. "Do it, we'll cover you." With a determined breath, David approached the crate and set his charges, knowing that this act could shift the war's balance. But as he prepared to ignite the fuse, a German soldier spotted him, raising his weapon. "Stop right there," the soldier shouted, panic igniting in David's veins as he ducked just in time. Bullets whizzed past him as he lit the fuse, the timer ticking ominously. Before he could turn, a shout pulled him back to focus. Esther emerged from the shadows, taking down the soldier with a swift strike. David sprinted away from the crate just as the fuse burned down. The explosion rocked the yard, fireballs illuminating the night sky. David and Esther stumbled, propelled by the sheer force of the blast as chaos erupted around them. Back in St. Faith, the battle raged on, bullets flying as Jimmy and Maria fought to secure their captive. They pressed deeper into the heart of the chaos, their mission now intertwined with survival. As they emerged into a clearing, another explosion echoed in the distance. The ground trembled beneath their feet, each tremor a visceral reminder of the war's brutality. "We have to find a way out," Maria shouted, urgency thrumming in her voice. The officer, realizing he was at their mercy, looked at them with a mix of fear and desperation. "If you want to survive, you need to trust me. I know a way out." Jimmy and Maria exchanged glances, understanding that their fates were now linked in a way they could never have anticipated. "Lead the way," Jimmy ordered, the gravity of the moment pressing down on them. As they followed the officer's direction, the sounds of the battlefield echoed behind them. The war was far from over. They were still caught in the maelstrom of violence that defined their lives. The stakes were rising, and soon they would face their greatest challenges yet. Each choice would ripple through history, binding their destinies in ways they could not yet comprehend. As they ventured deeper into the chaos, a question loomed large. Would this fragile alliance lead them to safety, or would the shadows of war claim them once more? The final act awaited, where their paths would converge with fate, revealing the true cost of their fight for freedom. As the explosions' reverberations faded into the chaos surrounding them, Captain James Jimmy Ellis and Lieutenant Maria Schneider pressed forward, driven by the urgency of their situation. The German officer led them through a narrow alley between debris-laden buildings, the sound of gunfire echoing behind them. Sweat mingled with the grime on their faces, but survival surged as the singular goal in their minds. Jimmy urged, his grip firm on his weapon, scanning for any threats. The officer glanced back, fear evident in his eyes. "This way. We can reach a safe house just a block over." Maria stole a glance at the officer, weighing the truth of his words against the persistent doubt that gnawed at her. "Why should we trust you?" she shot back, her voice laced with skepticism. "Because if you take me to your command, I can give you intelligence that might save your lives and the lives of countless others," he pleaded. "I want to survive too. I have no loyalty left to this regime." A heavy silence hung in the air as they reached the back of a destroyed building, its walls riddled with bullet holes and shrapnel. The officer's words echoed in Maria's mind, but she couldn't shake the feeling that every second spent debating their next move risked their lives. "Let's go," Jimmy said, breaking the tension. "We can't stand here arguing. We have to decide our next step quickly." "They're fine," Maria relented, her heart pounding as they followed the officer into the darkness of the alley. Each step carried them deeper into uncertainty, but they pressed on, clinging to the hope that their gamble would pay off. Meanwhile, in the railway yard, David Cohen and the resistance fighters were engulfed in the fiery aftermath of their explosion. The air was thick with smoke, the smell of burnt timber and scorched earth a stark reminder of the battle's brutality. Encouraged by their success, David rallied his comrades, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We've created the distraction, now let us find the civilians." Esther moved into action, her fierce resolve shining through as she organized the fighters. "We've got to ensure everyone is safe before we can think about our next move. I'll lead them to the nearby building. You keep an eye on our perimeter." "It understood," David responded, his heart heavy with weight of responsibility. He watched as Esther guided the terrified civilians away from the chaos, knowing that every second counted. The stakes were high, and the urgency of their mission pressed down on him like the smoke that hung in the air. As he surveyed the yard, David noticed a group of German soldiers regrouping near the remaining supplies. Without a second thought, he ducked behind a stack of crates, determination surging through him. This war had taken too much already, and he wasn't about to let it take any more. With a deep breath, he prepared to charge. Just then, a familiar voice rang out behind him. "Over here." It was Esther, her hand motioning for him to follow her. She had led the civilians to safety and was now ready to assist him. "Let us do this together," David said, his heart racing as they moved toward the soldiers, adrenaline coursing through them both. Dickinson, Faith, Jimmy, Maria, and their captive maneuvered through the rubble-strewn streets, the route fraught with danger. The sounds of battle faded slightly, overtaken by the distant cries of soldiers and civilians caught in a crossfire. The officer turned to them, urgency in his voice. "We reach close to the safe house. Trust me, you will want to hear what I have to say." Jimmy and Maria exchanged glances, their resolve tested yet again. "If this is a trap," Maria warned, her voice low but steady. "It is not. I swear. I want to help you, and I can provide information that you need for your fight," he insisted, desperation lining his features. They moved forward, entering a dimly lit building. The interior was a stark contrast to the chaos outside, filled with silence that felt almost surreal. They maneuvered through the narrow hallways until finally they reached a small room where the officer motioned for them to stop. "This is it," he said, closing the door behind them. "I can give you the details on Operation What and what they're planning next." Jimmy stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the officer. "Start talking." The officer took a deep breath, fear and urgency flooding his expression. "They believe they can divide your forces and push back the Allied advance. If you know their movements, you can prepare." Maria interrupted, her brow knitted in disbelief. "Why should we trust your information? You could be feeding us false intel. What is your endgame?" The officer hesitated, his eyes darting around the room. "I don't want to die in this madness. I am offering you a chance to save lives, but only if you act on this intel quickly." Outside, the sounds of battle flared up again, the muffled thumps of artillery blending with the distant cries of wounded soldiers. "We don't have much time," Jimmy urged, sensing the urgency. "We'll take you with us," Maria said, her voice steady as she weighed their options. "But one wrong move and you'll regret it." The officer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Understood." As they prepared to leave the safe house, the tension thickened. They emerged into the chaos once more, the sights and sounds of war overwhelming them. They needed to navigate through the streets to reach a secure line of communication with their command. Meanwhile, David and Esther had successfully guided the civilians to safety, but the battle was far from over. They regrouped with the remaining fighters, knowing that the impact of their sabotage was a temporary victory. "David," Esther said, urgency glinting in her eyes. "We might have caused the distraction, but we need to ensure the Germans don't regroup too quickly. We should hit them while they were still disoriented. Let us create another diversion," David suggested, recalling how they had ignited the flames before. "If we can cut off their supply lines, we can make this a lasting impact." Esther nodded, fire and determination radiating from her. "I'll lead a few of our fighters to the north side. We can flank them. You stay here and monitor the civilians. Once we be ready to attack, I'll send a signal." As she prepared to leave, David grasped her hand. "Be careful." With a nod, Esther vanished into the shadows, her spirit unwavering as she readied her team for a bold move. Dickinson, Faith, Jimmy, Maria, and their captive moved swiftly through the remnants of the Terran, footsteps echoing as they ducked between crumbling walls. Every sound felt amplified in the charged atmosphere. As they neared their destination, a near-splitting explosion sounded in the distance, sending tremors through the ground beneath them. "What was that?" Maria exclaimed, her heart racing. "Probably a coordinated attack," Jimmy replied, urgency swelling in his chest. "We need to keep moving." As they neared the Allied command post, their hearts raced, each moment stretched thin with tension. The officer led them down a narrow alley, and soon they reached a barricade where American soldiers stood ready. "We need to speak with your commander," Jimmy shouted, his voice firm even as chaos swirled around them. The soldiers exchanged worried glances, but one stepped forward. "What is going on? We have crucial intelligence about the German plans," Jimmy replied, urgency in his tone. "We need to relay this immediately before they can launch the next offensive." At that moment, the officer spoke up, his voice steady. "If you listen to me, I can provide you with details that could save lives." As they were ushered inside, the command room was filled with the frantic energy of strategists piecing together the next moves in the war. Maps adorned the walls, but it wasn't until they arrived that the commander turned his attention to them. the commander demanded, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the officer. Jimmy stepped forward, heart racing. "We have intel on Operation Watamarin. It is a large-scale offensive aimed at dividing our forces in the Ardennes. We need to act quickly." As the officer corroborated the information, tension filled the air. Soldiers around them shifted, absorbing the gravity of the situation. The commander's expression hardened. "We need to prepare our defenses immediately. This could turn the tide." Outside, the sounds of battle intensified, but within those walls, there was a palpable shift, a sense of purpose. The fate of many rested on the decisions made in that room. Meanwhile, David and his team prepared for their own decisive moment, knowing that their actions would contribute to the larger fight for freedom. As they launched their next attack, the battlefield transformed once more. The convergence of their stories, Jimmy, Maria, David, and Esther, formed an intricate tapestry of courage, resolve, and unyielding spirit, fighting against the tide of tyranny. The echoes of their struggles reverberated through history, a testament to the human spirit's resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. Somewhere, amidst the embers of conflict, hope flickered.